Old Grumpy Hunter here. I had already started working on this video and received a comment on my last video, how much speed do I need? The viewer commented, speed is important, but I think kinetic energy is more important. He wrote it in all caps like it's seen here. Kinetic energy is overrated and for the most part is useless. This video is going to upset some people. If kinetic energy is overrated and useless, then why are crossbow manufacturers and some users obsessed with speed and especially kinetic energy? I touched on this somewhat hot topic in many other videos, but instead of just touching on it, I'm going to jump up and down on it with both feet to put it out. Crossbow manufacturers use speed and kinetic energy because big numbers sell crossbows. Speed and kinetic energy are big numbers. They put numbers on the front of the box like this. Frequently, it's the largest print on the box. It grabs the customer's eye. Looking at these images, which one would you purchase? I'm about to hurt somebody's feelings here. I'm sorry, I apologize in advance. You're going to purchase this one. You will purchase it because you've been brainwashed. Brainwashed because you came from the rifle hunting where kinetic energy is an important factor. You came from vertical bow hunting where the trend has been lighter, faster arrows. You may have been influenced by fancy advertising. You may have been influenced by a salesperson. Believe me, when I say I understand, I understand. Looking at 11 different websites for crossbows, I was able to come up with this table with initial speeds of 340 to 470 feet per second, and kinetic energies from 77 foot-pounds to 191 foot-pounds. 10 of the 11 websites listed kinetic energy right alongside speed and draw weight. How did I calculate the arrow weight? I used our well-known kinetic energy formula and did some rearranging. Before you ask, the kinetic energy formula is based on kilograms and meters per second. Because arrows are measured in grains and feet per second, we need a conversion factor. The weight of the arrow equals kinetic energy times the conversion factor divided by the velocity squared. Let's look at crossbow number 1 for example. Kinetic energy is 153. The speed is 415. We find the arrow weight is 399.98 grains. I'm just going to round it to 400 grains. Look at the fine print in the ad or on the box. It'll read something like this. Speeds up to XXX feet per second. Are you really getting that advertised kinetic energy? But with archery of any type, it's not about kinetic energy. When hunting with a rifle, it's recommended that at point of impact, the bullet should have 3,100 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Of all the crossbows listed in the table, the greatest kinetic energy is 191 foot-pounds, with the average of the 10 being 142 foot-pounds. This is at firing, not at point of impact. But when using a rifle, you need 3,100 foot-pounds at the target. There are rifles that even their maximum muzzle velocity and their heaviest bullet have less than 675 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Do you have any idea how many big game animals were taken with those two calibers? If you need a minimum of 3,100 foot-pounds of kinetic energy at the target with a bullet, how on earth can you kill anything with an arrow? Even at 191 foot-pounds, the crossbow with its greatest kinetic energy is still way below 3,100 foot-pounds. Kinetic energy is defined as total energy of a body in motion. Kinetic energy, as its name implies, is an energy and not a force. Furthermore, kinetic energy is most dependent on speed. The formula for kinetic energy squares the velocity. It's the squaring of the speed in the formula that makes dramatic changes in kinetic energy. Doubling the speed quadruples the kinetic energy. And in the case of an arrow or bullet, the kinetic energy is transferred to whatever object it hits. Many think of kinetic energy as shock power, and with a bullet there is a large amount of shock, especially when moving at 3,100 feet per second. There is no shock value with an arrow. Studies conducted by the U.S. Army indicate that tissue shock from hydraulic compression becomes significant only at velocities at or above 2,500 feet per second. Hydraulic shock will not happen with an arrow. With an arrow, when the kinetic energy is increased, there will be an increase in penetration. This is because the speed increase needed to get more kinetic energy also increases the arrow's momentum. The extra penetration will not be proportional to the increase in kinetic energy. In other words, if you double the kinetic energy, the penetration will not be doubled. In fact, kinetic energy really has little to do with arrow penetration being lethal. It is a useless number as far as archery is concerned. So why are we considering it? Dr. Ed Ashby, who researched arrow penetration for the better part of 30 years, states, "Kinetic energy is not the correct unit of measure for calculating any of the forces relative to penetration. Kinetic energy of an arrow at impact is how hard the arrow strikes. As mentioned before, kinetic energy is measured in foot-pounds. That is the energy needed to raise 1 pound, 1 foot. 1 foot-pound is a measure of energy and not a measurement of force. Force is part of the total energy of the arrow. Let's look at this from a slightly different angle. A 40 grain, 22 long rifle bullet moving at 1,250 feet per second has a kinetic energy of 138.8 foot-pounds. A 350 grain arrow moving at 320 feet per second has a kinetic energy of 79.5 foot-pounds. The 22 long rifle has almost twice the kinetic energy as the arrow. We've all seen the videos of the arrow and the bullet shot at a bucket of sand and a jug of water. What happens? With a bucket of sand, the arrow passes through and the bullet gets stopped inside. Why does that happen? Because kinetic energy is not a significant factor in penetration. With a jug of water, the arrow causes a leak, where the bullet causes an eruption. Why does that happen? The arrow does not have kinetic energy or shock value and cannot pass the energy into the water, but the bullet surely does. Since kinetic energy is basically a useless factor with archery and has very little to do with penetration or being lethal, what causes an arrow to penetrate or to be lethal? Arrow penetration has many factors. Shaft integrity. The arrow shaft has to hold together when hitting bone and not exploding upon impact. Broadhead efficiency. Sharp blades with a good mechanical advantage. Shot placement. This may be the most important factor for a humane kill. Arrow weight. Heavier arrows penetrate better because of greater momentum. As mentioned before, kinetic energy is an energy where momentum is a force. The greater the momentum an object has, the more force it takes to stop it. Momentum is directly proportional to weight and speed of the arrow and is not dependent on squaring the speed like kinetic energy. There's another thing to consider. Like with kinetic energy, when the speed doubles, the resistance to the arrow quadruples. What that means is impact, an arrow going 300 feet per second will have 4 times the resistance to penetration to the same skin as an arrow going 150 feet per second. Getting back to my question, why are crossbow hunters and manufacturers obsessed with kinetic energy and speed? Because a box with 153 foot-pounds printed on it is more impressive than a box with 0.736 slugs. Besides, people like to brag about how big things are. Now back on that buck. Their home, their car, their salary. Can you imagine someone saying, my crossbow has 0.73 slugs, when most of the world has no idea what a slug is? What is a slug? A slug, besides being a slimy gastropod, is a unit of mass. Newton's second law of motion states that a force equals mass times acceleration. Force is measured in pounds force. At the Earth's surface, an object with a mass of 1 slug exerts a downward force of approximately 32.2 pounds force. In other words, 1 pound force is the force needed to accelerate 1 slug of mass 1 foot per second squared. Let's see what happens to the kinetic energy and momentum when using the crossbow in the image. Using a calculated arrow weight of 400 grains for this crossbow, we can calculate the momentum. The momentum equals 0.736 slugs. Like kinetic energy equation, we have to have a conversion factor. Running a ballistics calculator using the initial speed of 415 feet per second and 400 grain arrow, we can then calculate the momentum resulting in the following table, as well as some interesting percentages. You see that the percentage of the kinetic energy drop is for the most part twice that of the percentage of the speed drop. Furthermore, the percentage of the drop in momentum is proportional to the percentage of the speed drop. Let me recap what I just talked about. Manufacturers are obsessed with kinetic energy because big numbers sell crossbows. There's a good chance you are not getting the advertised kinetic energy. Kinetic energy is defined as the total energy of a body in motion. Kinetic energy is not a force, but as the name implies, is energy. Kinetic energy is dependent on speed. Squaring the speed creates a dramatic changes in kinetic energy. Double the speed, quadruple the kinetic energy. Many think of kinetic energy as shock power. An arrow does not have shock power. Hydraulic shock requires a velocity of greater than or equal to 2,500 feet per second. When kinetic energy is increased, penetration will also increase because momentum is also increased. The increase in penetration is not proportional to the increase in kinetic energy. Dr. Ed Ashby's almost 30 years of Aero Penetration research shows that kinetic energy is not the correct unit of measure for calculating forces relative to penetration. Kinetic energy of an arrow is how hard the arrow strikes something. Kinetic energy is measured in foot-pounds. That is the energy needed to raise 1 pound 1 foot. Foot-pound is a measurement of energy and not a measurement of force. An arrow passes through a bucket of sand, but a bullet gets stopped inside. This is because kinetic energy is not a significant factor in penetration. Heavier arrows penetrate better because of greater momentum. Like kinetic energy, when the speed doubles, the resistance of the arrow also quadruples. This is true in both air and tissue. A slug is a unit of mass. Newton's second law of motion states that force equals mass times acceleration. Force is measured in pounds force. 1 slug is approximately 32.2 pound force. Kinetic energy drops at twice the rate of a speed drop. Kinetic energy is overrated. Right now, there are some heads that are exploding. Thank you for watching this Old Grumpy Hunter presentation. Please give it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel And don't forget to push the notification bell. Until next time, aim small, miss small.